You are listening to the Mother of All Talk Shows podcast with George Galloway.
We're ready for a general election in just a few weeks' time. No! They're going to hold a second referendum before a general election. Imagine. And the question on the ballot paper will be, do you want to leave the European Union with no deal, or do you want to remain in the European Union? In other words, a false dichotomy, a rigged referendum which they feel they're guaranteed to win. I'm not sure what I could possibly do in those circumstances. I'm not sure I could vote for any of those propositions for a variety of reasons. But the most important one is that we've already had a referendum. We already decided to leave the European Union. We still haven't left it yet. And until we leave it, a question offering the right to remain in the European Union is wholly illegitimate and, I would argue, illegal. So the courts are going to be busy. The political class are going to be busy. And I suspect that that loose talk on the BBC, although we are not a people given to rioting, there were riots, of course, by mainly young people in very poor parts of our great cities just 5 years ago or so. But that's not the kind of rioting that is being discussed on the BBC. There they're talking more about the yellow vests kind of rioting, politically motivated, mass, organized civil disobedience, which will shake this country to its foundations. Because if Margaret Beckett becomes my Prime Minister, I have no compunction about describing that as a coup. It's a coup against the British people. It's a coup against democracy. It will destroy the Labour Party because she is a Labour Member of Parliament. It will destroy the Labour Party, certainly destroy it in the Midlands, in the North, in South Wales, and in other places too. It would be a coup that I would oppose with every breath in my body, and I don't believe that I will be alone. Finally, whistleblowing. Catherine Gunn is one of my all-time heroes. She worked at GCHQ in the run-up to the Iraq War. She blew the whistle on absolutely illegal United States activity at the United Nations, where they were bugging and burgling, bribing and browbeating, doing anything, everything that they could to twist the necks of the members of the Security Council to get them to vote for the Bush and Blair invasion of Iraq, which turned out to be perhaps the greatest disaster of the last 100 years, and it isn't over yet. Catherine Gunn saw material crossed her desk, and by one means or another, it ended up on the front page of the pro-war Observer newspaper. Imagine. Within a couple of days, she had owned up to her line manager at GCHQ that she was the source of this story. She argued that her duty as a citizen to stop the greater crime of a war which would turn into a bloody inferno in which huge numbers of people would be incinerated was greater than her legal preclusion from conveying information that came across her desk under the Official Secrets Act. There's a new film about it coming out very shortly with Keira Knightley playing, and brilliantly, I understand, Keira Knightley playing Catherine Gunn. We've got Catherine Gunn on the show tonight. We've got Lee Camp, the American comedian, television presenter, and all-round sound man. One of the very best of the Americans. And we've got Matthew Goodwin, who, as a psephologist, as a political scientist, and as a writer on these tumultuous days through which we are living in Britain today, is without peer, and he's here on this show, the mother of all talk shows tonight. All that and Ask Adam. Hashtag Ask Adam, the cleverest man in England. Now, Lee Camp is a friend of mine, so I'm already seized of how sharp, how brilliant, how hilariously funny he is. But for those of you, perhaps on this side of the pond, who are not as familiar as they are on the other, this is who is Lee Camp. First of all, his website is totally brilliant, leecamp.com. You really have to add that to your daily visits online. He's the head writer and host of the national television show Redacted Tonight with Lee Camp on RT America. He's a former contributor to The Onion, a former humour writer for the Huffington Post, and his web series Moment of Clarity has been viewed by millions. He's toured the country and the world with his fierce brand of stand-up comedy. And George Carlin's daughter, no less, Kelly, said that Lee Camp is one of the few comics who keeps her father's torch lit. And Bill Hicks's brother, Steve, said that Lee Camp is one of only a handful with Bill's message and passion. I'm glad to say he joins us now. Lee, welcome to the show, my friend.
George, thank you for having me on your mighty and formidable show.
Thank you, my dear friend. Now, let's start with Donald Trump. How else could we do it? I said at the beginning, if you thought Russiagate was thin, the Ukraine gate is positively gossamer. Instead of the scandal being about the corruption of the Obama White House in the events and subsequent events in the Maidan and in the corruption of the Ukraine's political system, the overthrow of democracy in the Ukraine, which led to war and the dismemberment of the country. Instead of the story being about Biden-gate, it's about Donald Trump making a phone call to the now president of Ukraine, asking him to look into all of this. Haven't they got the horse before the cart here? Or the cart before the horse?
Yeah. It's amazing to watch such phenomenally corrupt people talk about the corruption of another politician. I think that this corruption, this type of corruption, has been quite normal in the American presidency and in our Congress for a long time now. But right now, the Democrats see it as their way out, as their way of defeating Donald Trump because in the next election, because they don't, the Democrats aren't speaking to any of the issues that your average Americans actually care about, at least maybe not any of them except for maybe Bernie Sanders in certain ways. And it is amazing that under Obama and Biden, we prop up a coup and a takeover of the Ukraine with the help of Nazis that we helped fund and sided with, and now Biden then goes over there and says we'll hold up $1 billion in aid if you don't get rid of this prosecutor that is possibly looking into the oil company his son is on the board of with absolutely no experience in oil or companies. And then phenomenally corrupt actions. And then Trump, of course, is not very good at covering up his own corruption. So he finds himself in this ridiculous situation. And our media is running around with a frenzy, acting like the corruption is only on one side, when it is so clearly throughout our infested system.
Absolutely. But, it would have been more of a crime for Trump not to ask the Ukraine government to look into the corruption of the Bidens and others in the Obama administration in those years. But I suppose it doesn't matter so much what you and I think. The Democrats have decided to go for impeachment. How's that going to play?
Well, exactly. If you just from a political maneuver, is this really going to help the Democrats? Trump already raised millions and millions of dollars the moment that this impeachment inquiry was announced, and your average American doesn't seem to care about this. And furthermore, you get rid of Trump and you just have Mike Pence, who arguably is actually better at running the system and gutting things like like the EPA. Just the other day, there was leaked audio of oil lobbyists saying that they're unhappy the gutting of the EPA, our Environmental Protection Agency, is not going smoothly because Trump has not put in, people that are good at doing the gutting of the Environmental Protection Agency. So if you get Mike Pence in there, if you were actually to get Trump out, and you just make things even worse. So it's, it really is a Hail Mary pass by the Democrats because they're trying to force in a corrupt corporatist and Joe Biden as the nominee for president. And, it doesn't seem that he could possibly defeat Donald Trump because he doesn't actually stand for anything that Americans want as they suffer over here. And inequality is worse than ever before, and surveillance and prison industrial complex and our endless wars. None of it's changed. None of it changed under Obama. None of it's changing now, and the Democrats can't speak to any of it.
Now, tell us about the Democratic race, will you? Biden, unbelievably, I mean, he is the zombie candidate if ever I saw one. I saw his false teeth shoot out of his mouth and skid across the studio floor. I saw blood coming from his eyes. I'm always afraid he's going to melt. All the wax in his heavily worked face is going to melt under the television lights. He forgets things. He even seems to forget the most intimate parts of his own life, his own marriage, and so on. Can he really still be the front runner?
Well, that's the thing. I have a lot of doubts about these polls. I mean, when CNN first was saying that Biden was winning by 30 points or whatever, if you clicked on about 14 links all the way to the source of the poll, they weren't interviewing anyone under 50 years of age because that's what they needed to do to make it look like Biden was running away with it. But our media, and for your own sanity, I hope you aren't watching too much American media. But if you watch our corporate media, it is the levels that they're going to bend over backwards to try and push Biden into this office is truly tremendous. Bernie Sanders is the candidate that cannot be mentioned. So now they'll keep saying that it's a two-way race. You got Biden and Elizabeth Warren. Occasionally they'll mention Kamala Harris, but they will not say Bernie Sanders' name, even though he's at least polling equal with Warren, possibly much higher. But they just act like he doesn't exist. And we saw this same thing in the last election. The final numbers were that Donald Trump got 23 times as much coverage as Bernie Sanders during the primary. Our media is just a catastrophe, and they're trying so hard to get Joe Biden in because honestly, the corporate Democrats and the corporate media are far less worried about Donald Trump continuing in the office as they are worried about someone like Bernie Sanders, who might actually speak up against inequality and actually threaten their tax breaks of the richest Americans.
Well, we've got exactly the same thing here. It is unconscionable that Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, will be allowed to come to power. They openly state it. They implicitly threaten all kinds of very un-British things will happen to stop Corbyn going in. And now they're promoting a centrist figure in the Labour Party to be the head of a government of national unity. Anything at all but Corbyn. That is their ABC, anything but Corbyn. That is their approach. And it seems directly the same as is happening in the United States. And for the same reasons. Because Sanders not only is the most progressive candidate, certainly since George McGovern, I argue more progressive than George McGovern, and crucially, with a much bigger reach into the public than McGovern in the end turned out to have. And he proved that last time. He's proving it again now. He speaks to the workers. He speaks to those whose collars are blue. He speaks to the middle class, working class America. Who does Joe Biden speak to or for? He was part of an administration with the NAFTA and so on that caused the desolation, the desertification of industrial America, which led directly to Donald Trump in the first place.
Yeah. Many people don't realize just how horrific Biden's record is. I mean, supporting all these horrible trade deals, but also a lot of the ramping up of the truly crime against humanity that is our drug war that has made us in America the largest prison state in the world was Biden's idea. It was done with his pushing. He was back in the late 80s and 90s. He was constantly putting forward bill after bill to further the police state and to make drug charges, life sentences and things like that. And he is, was a very pivotal part of what has become this horrific prison industrial complex in our country that gutted communities of color, gutted poor communities, and Joe Biden was at the front of all of that. And let's remember that Joe Biden is also winning the presidential race in another respect. He has lost the most number of presidential races. He has lost 2 already. This would make his 3rd. He lost 1 just because no one wanted to vote for him. He lost the earlier one in the 80s because of plagiarism. I believe stealing from one of your politicians over there. And he's just
not just one of our politicians, but record. Neil Kinnock. Anyone who would steal the work of Neil Kinnock needs locking up, not put in the White House.
Exactly. And so he's tried to reinvent himself, including his face, which is made out of all new parts. And it's just horrific. Once people start looking into him, he's going to completely crumble, and as he already seemed to be. And our media is just doing everything they can to act like he is the only one that is running for this election.
And the other one is a phony. This Elizabeth Warren, who's running as a kind of almost as left as Bernie Sanders, she was a Republican. Only a few years ago, she supported the Vietnam War from first to last. In what universe is she a rival candidate to someone like Sanders?
Yeah, with Elizabeth Warren as well, she's doing this fake populism, fake Sanders routine. But if you look into her record, she is horrible on war and foreign policy. I recommend anybody who likes her to watch the 5 minutes where she questioned General Mad Dog Mattis during the Senate hearings. And she had 5 minutes to ask whatever she wanted of a war criminal that bombs wedding parties. And she asked him whether he supports innovation. I mean, it was the lightest questioning. It had the backbone of a arthritic jellyfish, and her on foreign policy, war, all of it, she's terrible. She doesn't actually stand for Medicare for all. She claims she's not taking corporate donations during the primaries, but is going to take them during the general election, meaning she is going to ultimately be owned by these corporations and has been since day one. And then there's the kind of racist dynamic. With the Native Americans never actually doing anything for them, but claiming she's one herself. She put out a book that's just come to light. It's been passed around recently called Pow Wow Chow that claims she's writing for the remaining civilized tribes. It's phenomenally offensive.
And it turned out she was, 0.0.05 Cherokee.
Yeah,
I've got more Cherokee blood than that. Lee, in the minutes available, I've plugged already your website, which is fantastic, leecamp.com. But you were over here, you did a flying visit, 1 gig in London, and I couldn't go to it because I'm on the air on Sunday nights. When are you coming back? When can people see you? How can they see you? On screen, if not on stage?
Oh, man, I'd love to come back. I used to tour the UK a lot before the TV show used up all my time. But I'm not sure when I'm headed back. But if anybody wants to watch my comedy special, it's at leecampcomedyspecial.com.
leecampcomedyspecial.com. Well, we definitely will encourage everyone to do that. leecamp.com. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, younger viewers and listeners may not know, but I was one of the leaders of the great anti-war movement in Britain, which moved more people on more demonstrations than any cause, any organisation ever has in the history of these islands. Millions upon millions of us demonstration after demonstration, protest after protest, but we failed. And that's the only regret that I have from that era in which I was heavily involved. Everything that's happened since in Iraq, of course, wholly vindicates us. There's no question about that. There's nobody will turn up to debate against me now in 2019, arguing that the Iraq war was right. But it was not, of course, a foregone conclusion that we would turn out right. Certainly, the mass media, the political class, and the deep state itself was wholly convinced, it seemed, that the course of action they were on was not just right and proper, but was vitally necessary. Many of them have begun to repent at leisure, usually well-paid repentance at leisure, as multi-millionaires, in Mr. Blair's case, £100 million personal fortune. But looking at his face, I'm pretty sure that the conscience which God gave him has not entirely disappeared. I feel sure that he has difficulty sleeping at night. And because I'm a believer, I believe that he, like me, like you, like everyone, will face a judgment day. And on that judgment day, he's going to have a lot of questions to answer. Anyway, you, if you're old enough, will recall that the United States government led by George W. Bush, the British government led by Tony Blair, were doing everything that they possibly could to persuade the members of the Security Council to endorse their decision to invade and occupy Iraq. They knew that France was going to veto it because the president of France, who died this week, Jacques Chirac, was going to veto any attempt to get the Security Council to endorse the war. They knew that, but they wanted symbolically to win a majority of the countries on the Security Council so that they could claim at least some moral superiority in their judgment. They failed, but they tried, and they tried fair means and foul. They tried legal means and they tried illegal. They bugged, they burgled, they browbeat, they bribed, they twisted arms, even necks, of the countries on the Security Council at that time to get them to vote for the Bush and Blair war. And they failed at that. But the methods that they were using were, of course, absolutely illegal. They were crimes. They were crimes against the Secretary General of the United Nations, who was being bugged. They were crimes against the Security Council of the United Nations, in theory, the most important and powerful body in the world today. And we know that they were doing this only because of the bravery, the moral standing, the moral fibre of my next guest on the show this evening. Because Catherine Gunn was an employee of GCHQ, and suddenly this information directly from the horse's mouth, from the American administration's mouth, about the crimes they were committing in New York, in the United Nations building, crossed her desk. Now, she was bound by the Official Secrets Act never to impart information that came her way in the course of her work. But she took the view that what was being planned in Iraq was a far greater crime. And of course, now that looks obvious. Then it took a great deal of moral clarity and courage. And she showed it. And she stood up, ready to be punished, prosecuted for the small crime that she committed in order to try and bring about an end to a far, far bigger crime. As I said earlier, there's now a docudrama, a movie, in which Katharine is played by Keira Knightley, and that film is called official secrets. And I understand from people who have seen it that Keira Knightley plays Catherine Gunn brilliantly. And she's on the line now, not Keira Knightley, but Catherine Gunn. I'm glad to say, Catherine, welcome to the show.
Thank you, George. Thank you very much.
Now, tell me, first of all, let's get the Hollywood out the way. What's it like to be played by Keira Knightley, and did she do a good job representing you?
Well, she's done a tremendous job, I think. In some ways, she comes across perhaps more fiercely than I did, maybe. But I think she's done a tremendous job. But I have to say it's very surreal. And here I am sat in Turkey, washing dishes, cooking the dinner, and it doesn't feel real in actual fact. So
well,
what can I say?
You know, you're washing dishes, making dinner, and speaking to a very large audience across the world here on the Mother of All Talk Shows, and we're grateful to you for that. Let's take you back, take the viewers and listeners back to the fateful day, I don't know which day of the week it was, when this information first came your way. Can you describe to us how you felt when you saw and what you saw?
It was a Friday, and it was the end of January. It was a cold and bleak January day, and I'd already come to the conclusion that the war that they were proposing was illegal. I'd already researched, I'd bought a couple of books from my local bookstore and I read them. And, you know, I did as much research as I could across the board to find out what really was going on. And I'd come to the conclusion that it couldn't possibly be legal. And so when I saw that email, it was like a red flag to a bull. I've kind of described it in some ways as if you see a child crossing the road when a lorry's coming or something, and your immediate reaction is grab them, do something, get them out of harm's way. And that was, to be honest, that was my gut reaction, was that this was explosive. It had the potential to derail the you know, the train wreck that was coming. And so that's what I did. I leaked it. I printed it off the following Monday when I came back into work.
Can you, insofar as you're able, can you tell us the highlights of that email?
Well, it was from a person called Frank Koza at the NSA. He was the chief of regional targets at the NSA. And basically the email was directed at a sort of section of analysts that would cover this sort of target area of countries, which included, so they specifically mentioned these countries that were sitting on the UN Security Council, the swing nations, which the nations they wanted to influence in order to get this sort of moral majority that you were talking about. And they were Angola, Bulgaria, Cameroon, Chile, Guinea, and Pakistan. And so these 6 swing nations that were on the UN Security Council at the time, we were asked, or GCHQ was being asked to intercept or to harvest, to collect the communications from their domestic and office sort of telephones, if you like, and fax or what have you back in that time, and to use to gather, and I think this is a quote, to gather the whole gamut of information that would give the US results favorable to US goals and to further their interests. So, as soon as I saw that sort of sentence in that language, and to use all means necessary, I thought, this is scandalous.
Now, when they say all means necessary, they were, of course, implicitly including illegal means.
Yes.
Bugging.
Yeah.
It turned out that they had been bugging the Secretary General Kofi Annan himself, as well as bugging the diplomatic offices of these swing states inside the UN building, which has special status diplomatically. They were bugging all communications to and from the offices of those swing states. Now, given what your job was, you knew that that could not possibly be legal, didn't you?
Well, you could argue that many things that they do are illegal, but they would argue that they're covered by law to do so. From my point of view, it was a line that I was not willing to cross, because although, you know, many people on the opposite side of this argument would say, well, everybody does this. You know, we all want to know what's going on in other people's minds, and this is how we do it. But what I couldn't accept was that this wasn't about gaining the upper hand in a trade negotiation or in some sort of, you know, political field. This was to do with human lives, war and peace, and it was a country that posed no threat to anyone at the time, a country that had already been under over 10 years of, as you well know, of genocidal sanctions, and beyond that, war that had gone on previously. So it was a country that was utterly devastated. And, you know, frankly, I could not see at all how they could possibly be a threat to anybody. And that was why I had to act.
And that's exactly, of course, how it turned out. It turned out that the dictators in Iraq were the ones telling the truth, and the democratic leaders of our country and the United States who were telling the lies. So what happened next, Catherine? You photocopied the email. By one means or another, it ended up on the front page. I remember it still. Of, ironically, the pro-war Observer. Were you shocked at the show that the paper gave? Because it was a very big story.
It was a very big splash, yes. And I was very, very shocked. To be honest, I hadn't expected that was how it would come out. But I can see subsequently that they had to do that because they needed the maximum impact. But it sort of left me hanging out in the cold, and I had to. I didn't. Well, I could have carried on denying it, I suppose. But in reality, that's an almost impossible position to take because of, you know, a conscience which dictates that you shouldn't lie. And so I felt ultimately that I had to come clean. And that's what I did eventually after 2 days.
And what, can you remember the look on the face of the manager that you, as it were, confessed to? What did he or she say?
Well, as it happens, she was very sympathetic. Now, in all of my experience at that time, everybody that I came across basically was sympathetic. When I told her, I simply said, the leak is me, or I did it, something to that effect. And she just looked at me and sort of went, oh, Katharine. And then she put her arm around me. So I was, you know, I was not in any sort of immediate kind of
danger.
No, obviously not. But that feeling that, you know, I'd got it off my chest and we could move forward and whatever was going to happen next would happen next. That sort of, yeah, that was the next step.
Did you expect to be prosecuted? Indeed, the government took it right to the steps of the court, didn't they?
Well, they arrested me. So they arrested me on suspicion of breaking the Official Secrets Act originally. So that happened the following day because they had to search the house, and 24 hours later they actually gave me the formal words. And then yes, they didn't charge me straight away. It was 8 months before they decided to charge me, by which time we'd kind of come to the conclusion that they probably weren't going to charge me. So it was a surprise when they decided to charge me.
What was the attitude of the police who arrested you? I mean, were you handcuffed? Were they rude?
No, not at all. No, I was treated remarkably well. In fact, I have to say that the CID, I guess it was, who came to interview me in Cheltenham, when he finally interviewed me and then let me go, he said on the steps of Cheltenham Police Station, he said, "It has been a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Gunn. I'm just sorry it was under these circumstances."
Well, how very British. That's quite heartwarming, actually. So they did charge you, and they were going to prosecute you, and they abandoned it at the last minute. Why do you think they did that?
Well, that's a very good question, and it continues to be interesting to me. At the time, we considered that it had something to do with the Attorney General's advice that eventually leaked much later. But had the trial gone ahead, then the Attorney General's advice at the time, the first lot of his advice would have come out.
Describing the war as potentially illegal.
That's right. Mm-hmm. On top of that, we considered the fact that if a jury had decided to go presumably against the judge's wishes to convict, and they said I was not guilty, then the defense of necessity would have stood
as a precedent.
Yes, and subsequently we also considered the fact that the general election was coming up in 2005, and a long trial whereby the war in Iraq was literally put on trial would not have looked good at all. However, recently it was published in The Guardian by the then Crown prosecution, Sir Ken MacDonald, that the reason for dropping the case was down to national security. And I find that very intriguing.
Yeah, well, I mean, what can he mean by that?
Well, I've thought about that. And at first, my immediate reaction was that's just a blanket coverage for anything. Subsequently, I thought a little bit further on the issue and decided he may actually be telling somewhat the truth, because in fact this is pre-Snowden, and so the sort of umbilical relationship between GCHQ and NSA had not really been exposed, and the level and the extent to which GCHQ and NSA were collecting data on a massive scale across both nations, that hadn't come out either. So it occurs to me that potentially may be telling the truth, that at the time it was because they did not even want to venture down that avenue in the trial.
Now, you mentioned Snowden, and I mentioned earlier Julian Assange, who is, now that he's served time, the appropriate level of time that he was sentenced to for the jumping of bail, is now explicitly being held as a whistleblower. He is a political prisoner now. No one can deny that. And being held in much less comfortable circumstances than I'm glad to say you were subjected to. He's behind the grim prison walls at Belmarsh in solitary confinement, and maybe there for years. So whistleblowing hasn't gone away. There are always people like you, like Snowden, like Assange, who are prepared to tell the truth, to blow the whistle on crimes and misdemeanors amongst the powerful. Do you feel yourself a part of that community, or are you of the mind, well, you did what you had to do and now you've left it all behind?
I think that's a good question, and actually it's probably the reverse. At the time when the case was dropped against me, all I wanted to do was go back to a sort of normal, anonymous life. I wanted to recover from that experience because, in fact, it was fairly traumatic. And for 2 years, I really had a hard time getting my head around it. Subsequently, I became a mother, and I didn't want to, do anything particularly in that vein. But now that the film has come out, and of course that it's kind of miraculous that the film has actually been made, because it was a long and arduous process. I feel the issues are so crucial and so relevant even to this day that, I'm prepared to speak out and do interviews like this one with you, George, just to try and get the message through to people.
Yes, because if people don't blow the whistle, then great crimes can be committed in the darkness and in our name, using our money, our resources, and which, if they backfire, as the Iraq War clearly has, can make the world less safe for all of us.
Well, indeed, our own intelligence services said as much back then, that that was the result of what an invasion of Iraq would do, and they were right.
Yes, but they would have been ignored, were ignored. If you
they
think
were ignored.
I'm making a film right now, it's almost finished, about the strange death of Dr. David Kelly. And so, of course, I'm now deeply absorbed again in all these things. And indeed, the Iraq will follow me through the rest of my life, as it will follow you, and indeed, whether people like it or not, is following them. But the act, whatever happened to Kelly, and you'll need to wait to see my film to discover what that was, clearly whatever happened to him is intimately connected to the fact that he spoke to a BBC journalist, then BBC journalist, at the time of the war, and told him certain things. What happened to you was because you told people who were not legally authorized to know, but whom you felt it was your civic duty as a citizen to impart this information, to get it out. And that's what Snowden did. That's what Assange has done. That's why, isn't it, they're treating people like Assange particularly brutally, because they realize that if whistleblowing becomes a fashion or a habit or the norm, then great crimes may well regularly be exposed.
Yes, well, I do remember that at the time my case was dropped, there were, arguments that this was going to open a can of worms, and literally there would be leaks, day in and day out from GCHQ. And, clearly that has not been the case. Regardless of how easy it becomes to blow the whistle, let's say, regardless of how much protection you would have under the law, it would still be an incredibly rare event. Because even in the public sector, in the US and in the UK, where they do have public interest defenses in whistleblowing, you still see precious little whistleblowing. And even then, even with those protections, they are retaliated against. So the facts of the matter are that very few people are able or willing to come forward. And so coming down really hard like this on people, including Assange, who essentially is a publisher.
A publisher, yes.
And this is a very dangerous avenue, because, they wouldn't go after The Guardian. They wouldn't go after the New York Times, let's say, because it's a much bigger institution to tackle, whereas Julian Assange is a man on his own. And, you know, this is a very dangerous precedent, as I'm sure you're well aware. So
I am only too well aware. You're right, there will not be daily examples of whistleblowing, neither should there be. We need intelligence services. We need to know about threats against the public realm, against the people in that realm. We need to know what bad people are planning to do. We need all these things. And we don't want every secret exposed, every whistle blown. But regularly, more regularly than unfortunately it should be, there are examples of our own governments doing such bad things, such wrong things, such things that will harm us all, that whistleblowers like you do come forward. They need to have courage, of which you had in abundance. They have to have character. They have to have moral standing, moral fibre. And that's why I said at the beginning, you've always been something of a hero to me. Finally, how did you end up in Turkey? Is it connected to what happened to you?
Not really. My husband is from Turkey, and we prefer the weather here.
Yes,
and the cost of living is cheap
today.
Yeah.
And the cost of living is cheaper.
It's cheaper at the moment, yes.
Well, I wish you, and I'm sure I speak for everyone listening and watching this interview, Katharine, I wish you every success to you, your husband, your children, and long life to you. You have written your name into the noble history of those who stand up against that which is wrong. Now, last week I introduced a new item onto the show, On This Day in History. It's actually in this week rather than specifically on this day, though it's remarkable how many things happened on this day. Because this is a particularly busy show, I'm only going to showcase two of those. On this day in 1960 at the United Nations in New York, the Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev erupted in anger, pounding his desk with his shoe. Sadly, I'm old enough to remember that in real time. I was 6 years old. I was, of course, extremely interested in Khrushchev, in the Soviet Union, because of the political atmosphere around me, even as a child. And I later grew to be enormously interested in the reason that Khrushchev was so animated. He was so animated because of the now quite patently transparent conspiracy against the Congo and its leader, Patrice Lumumba, in my view, the greatest of all African leaders, murdered as a young man by Britain, the United States, Belgium, and the Western imperialist camp. The process began in the days leading up to Khrushchev's angry outburst at the United Nations. And he called for the removal of the Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld to be replaced by a three-man executive representing the Western, the Soviet, and the neutral, non-aligned camps, because Hammarskjöld was being used by British, Belgian, and American interests to bring about a situation which could only lead to the overthrow of the government of the Congo, which then, as now, was the richest country in all Africa. And, of course, not long after Mr. Khrushchev's angry outburst in the UN chamber, Patrice Lumumba was murdered, and a coup took place in which the greatest thief of the 20th century, Mobutu Sese Seko, was put in charge of the Congo, which he renamed Zaire. and he ruled for decades, looting the country, the richest country in Africa, of hundreds of millions of dollars. Some say billions of dollars. And he salted that wealth away, of course, in Western property markets and in corruption from which the very Western governments that brought him to power profited again from. Dag Hammarskjöld, on the other hand, died in a very mysterious plane crash on a visit to the Congo. And I recently saw an important documentary about that. Now, only time for one more, but it's a very important one. In this week, in 1970, the Egyptian president Gamal Abdel Nasser died. And the Arab masses, some say, became orphans. Their father figure, who sought to unite them from Marrakesh to Bahrain, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Persian Gulf, who sought to unite them as hundreds of millions of people who spoke the same language and who had a common culture and who had underneath their feet all the resources that God could possibly send any group of people. If President Nasser had succeeded in his mission of uniting the Arabs, no discussion of international affairs would be possible without the Arab world sitting at the top table. They would be a superpower. But those who did not want that to happen did everything that they could to break, to destroy the mission of President Nasser, the greatest of all Arab leaders. Some say the last Arab president. He died in this week in 1970. And I, for one, am still sad about that. Now, have we got a call on the line? Why don't we take Clodagh in Ireland? Just because I love Ireland and I like the name Clodagh. Clodagh, welcome.
Hi, George. That's very sweet. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And congratulations on a wonderful show.
Thank you so much.
Just really quickly about the Joe Biden travesty at the moment.
Yes.
Yeah, just help me understand this a little bit. From what I understand, the company that was being investigated was called Burisma or something along those lines, isn't it?
That's right. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. From listening to your opening, I think anybody would get the impression that Joe Biden's son was working for this company.
He was on the board of directors.
Yep. And this prosecutor was, investigating him or the company.
Yeah.
And of course, Biden then gets worried about his son and gets him kicked out. But from my understanding and what I found out about this is, this company was being investigated a fair while before that. And it was actually, the investigation was actually dormant. They said this in 2014. And actually, the deputy prosecutor of the man in question, the prosecutor that Biden kicked or wanted out, Vitality Casco, said to Bloomberg News that this was the case, that it was actually shelved. So I suppose my main point there, on the first point being that, Biden certainly didn't seem to have much motive if the case had been shelved. And the second thing is, I think he's Darius, I can't remember his second name, I think it's Kalinuk. He was, or is, I think, currently the director of the Anti-Corruption Center.
Zelenik, yeah.
Yeah, and he said that it wasn't, just a Biden thing, that there was numerous different bodies that were looking to get him out, including the European Union, I think the Monetary Fund. So there was a lot more.
Well, that is precisely my point. Let me tell you what I think, Clodagh. Hunter Biden, the crack cocaine man, knew nothing about oil and gas. He knew nothing about companies. He knew nothing about Ukraine. So why did he end up on the board of directors of a gas oil company operating in the Ukraine? The answer to me is obvious, because his father was Joe Biden, the Vice President of the United States, a country which had caused the chaos and the coup in the Ukraine in the first place, and had brought to power a circle of people who were absolutely beholden to the US Embassy, to the US government, including Joe Biden. Now, Joe Biden visited Ukraine 13 times in 25 months. Now, there is no plausible explanation why that should be. There is no place in the world he even visited thrice in that period of time, never mind 13 times to the Ukraine. What was it that was so beautiful, that was drawing him so often to the Ukraine? And the answer, to me, is obviously money. So Hunter Biden wasn't the real director of that oil and gas company. Joe Biden was. And the other crooks around President Barack Obama, who were sucking the blood even from the first day of Ukraine, and were determined to use Ukraine as a spear, as a knife in the side of Ukraine's neighbor, Russia. Clodagh, thanks for the call. Let me go to New York City, where Albert is on the line. Albert.
Yes, how do you do?
I'm doing fine. Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Galloway.
Yeah, go ahead, brother.
It's good to hear from you. I enjoy your expertise. Is very amazing over here from New York City.
Thank you.
I just want to ask you one thing, and I think you're right. You hit it on point, and it's a fact. Me personally, in a situation with the elections over here, I see no one beating Donald Trump. Donald Trump is going to win it hands down. And when that happens, remember, I'm going to say straight to the point. When that happens, World War III is going to be around the corner. They're going to launch an attack on Iran. It's already been said. The war drums are beating in the air. It's just a matter of time. That's all.
Well, that's sobering, Albert. Thank you for returning us to the horrors of forthcoming wars, when we've just been talking about the gigantic horror of previous wars in the very same region, carried out by the very same powers. But I need to move on to matters British. Now, to say that Matthew Goodwin is a professor of politics and international relations is like saying that Ronaldo is a footballer. Goodwin is the doyen now of psephologists, political scientists. His daily output is phenomenal, and he's got plenty of material to work with, because he's concentrating on Britain post the 2016 Brexit referendum, with all of the political and economic ramifications that have flown from it. And so I'm particularly glad that we've got him on the Mother of All Talk shows this evening. Professor Matthew, thank you for joining us.
Good evening, George.
Let's look at the story that Andrew Neil purveyed today, namely that the likelihood is that the anti-Brexit majority in the House of Commons is planning on overthrowing the Prime Minister and installing a junta, which they are calling a government of national unity, and not for days or weeks, but for months and perhaps a year, which they will use to call a second referendum before calling a general election. I said earlier on Twitter that would be a very, very serious provocation. First of all, how likely is that in your view, and what do you think its reverberations would be?
Well, I think it's a possible outcome. It's not the most likely in my view, but one of the things that we have to think about firstly is whether that alliance, if you want to call it that, would have sufficient numbers in the House of Commons to be viable. And the second closely linked factor is whether it would be able to rally around one individual, and who that consensus candidate would be remains unclear. Would Jeremy Corbyn and his supporters simply stand aside for that outcome? I'm somewhat sceptical of that scenario. Would moderate Conservatives, Labour MPs and the Scottish Nationalists be able to agree upon some kind of consensual candidate, given their disarray over Brexit, their failure to find any consensus over Brexit? I'm somewhat sceptical of that. But let's say they were able to do this, then I think actually the effects would be quite damaging. My view of this issue, George, is that Brexit is interesting because it was the first moment in British history when a majority of people outside of Parliament asked for something that a majority of people inside Parliament really didn't support. And since then, we've seen the House of Commons really fail to converge on any consensus position. And so we have to go back to the people through an election. That would be the most logical, sensible thing to do, to put it back to that popular conception of sovereignty over that parliamentary conception of sovereignty, which is trying to reassert itself. If we head straight into a second referendum, I think it would be not only highly divisive, but would also unquestionably fuel that sense among voters that this is actually an elite-led stitch-up.
More especially if the question reflected a false dichotomy, which we're told by Mr. Peston and others it will. It would be a second referendum in which the question would be a no-deal Brexit versus Remain. Now, leaving aside, we've already answered whether or not we want to remain. Even Boris Johnson doesn't say he wants a no-deal Brexit, and therefore it would be a false dichotomy. It would be a question posed when actually only the Brexit Party positively wants a no-deal Brexit. The government, the Prime Minister, say that they want a deal Brexit. I can answer your point about who the Prime Minister, putative head of the junta, would be if Mr. Peston is correct. A consensus has been reached on the caravanning former deputy leader of the Labour Party, Dame Margaret Beckett. And according to Peston, the Labour Party will support that, as will the Liberal Democrats, as will the Scottish Nationalists, as will the majority, at least, of the 21 Tory MPs who've been kicked out of the Conservative Party. You know the numbers better than me, but that seems to me likely to be a majority.
Well, I think let's assume that the numbers were there for a Margaret Beckett or somebody like that. You know, I think we have to firstly think about how would ordinary voters respond to that. What would the first action be? Would it be to call a second referendum, or would it be to follow the Liberal Democrat position of revoking Article 50 altogether? And then under what conditions would we have the second referendum? My worry with regard to British democracy would be that we were to effectively rerun the referendum, not only with a question that divided one side of that debate. As you say, no deal would ultimately divide the Leave electorate, but also what else would change? Would we get votes at 16? Would EU nationals be permitted to vote? Would there be, in other words, a different playing field to the one that we saw in 2016? And this is beginning to seem to me, at least, to be, you know, really violating that long-standing British sense of fair play. which is why I think most sensible heads in the room would probably want to see a general election before any attempt at a second referendum.
Well, yes, one would hope that sense would prevail, but I get the sense that the Remain side in Parliament and in the media smells blood here. Boris Johnson's not had a good few weeks. He's in trouble on various fronts, some of them potentially quite serious. They sense blood. They sense that they can strike this down. Don't you feel that?
I think that there are potentially two motives at play. I think one might be Remain voices feeling as though they have momentum. That the last month for Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings, his advisor, have been difficult ones and mistakes were made. I do think that is quite a miscalculation. However, I think if you look at the polling, the Conservative Party vote is holding pretty steady. If you look at the last week, the Conservatives on average are about 8 points clear of Labour, and there are actually good reasons to think that the Leave vote is actually consolidating a little bit more than people would believe. But the second motive, I think, actually, George, is fear. I think there is a sense within some in Parliament that general election would actually deliver a Conservative majority, which would effectively pave the way for not only Brexit, but perhaps a harder or a cleaner, whatever term you prefer to use, a more meaningful Brexit than the one that is currently being discussed and debated in Parliament. So I think that's all coming into play. But of course, to go back to the original point about what is this all about, the clash between popular sovereignty on the one hand and parliamentary sovereignty on the other, this started, in my mind at least, with a lot of people feeling that they didn't have a voice in politics and that they felt forgotten by large chunks of what you might call the establishment. The answer to that, therefore, is not for the establishment politicians to be seen to be conspiring and colluding to keep the people out of the decision-making process or to tilt the deck in favor of an outcome that those in power want to see. That is not the answer to this moment that we're in.
Now, let's think ahead, finally, to a general election whenever it's held. It seems to me, you know better, that if the Conservatives and the Brexit Party at least have a non-aggression pact, i.e. they put up candidates in most constituencies, if not all, but they don't actually campaign against the person that they would like to win and who is most likely to win, who supports Brexit. If they reach that kind of modus operandi, they win a big victory. If, on the other hand, this becomes a four-party race with everyone going pell-mell for victory everywhere, you have four parties on roughly 20%, in the low 20s, maybe the mid-20s, but you have four parties in the 20%. That makes the election, such an election, almost impossible to predict the outcome of, doesn't it?
Well, you're absolutely right. The volatility makes it almost impossible to have a strong sense of how that election would turn out. The Brexit Party Conservative Pact would obviously make things infinitely easier for leavers. If you had the Conservative vote on 32% with the Brexit Party vote, which is currently 14%, you'd be well into the 40s. You would have a commanding majority of most likely more than 200 seats. If, on the other hand, the two parties were to effectively go to war, and this morning, obviously, Boris Johnson had ruled out, again, the idea of a pact, well, if Nigel Farage and the Brexit Party hold on to anywhere close to what they've got at the moment, which is 14%, that is going to jeopardize a large number of marginal seats for Boris Johnson and open up the possibility of perhaps some kind of Labour coalition, minority Labour government if things don't work out as planned for Boris Johnson in those pro-Brexit Labour seats. So you're absolutely right to point to that dynamic. I think it is the key dynamic to watch. And of course, one of the things I discovered this afternoon while looking at the numbers is that those Brexit Party voters, people forget this, but those Brexit Party voters are not conservative on the issue of free markets and the economy. They are worried about globalization. They feel that they want more intervention in the economy. They feel that they want more protection. And they're probably asking themselves the question, which is, is Boris Johnson going to give me that? And unless he can convince them that alongside Brexit, he's also going to be on their economic interest, not only their Brexit interest, but he's going to be on their side economically, then I think he might have a tough job.
Did you see Lord Ashcroft's polling today?
I did. I found it quite interesting for that very reason.
Yeah.
That he points out that the Brexit Party vote is the most sceptical of all when it comes to globalization and economic free markets.
I do hope Nigel Farage reads it, as well as Boris Johnson. Thank you very much, Professor, for helping us with the British political scene as Brexit marches. We thought ineluctably towards Halloween and Britain's exit from the European Union. It's not at all clear that we are going to be leaving on Halloween. The ghouls, the zombies are out in the streets. Adam Garrie, my resident professor, thank you very much indeed for joining us. We've got a shoal of questions, tweets. Most of them ask Adam, but others ask me. And we've even got callers on the line. We better take them because some of them have been hanging on for quite some time, if you'll permit me. It's Jonathan in Uruguay. How could I resist a call from Uruguay? Jonathan, welcome.
Thank you. I don't know if you could hear me okay.
Yeah, very clearly.
Well, I'm an
very
expat,
clearly. What would you like to say?
I watched the YouTubes. Basically, the subject about the referendum, advisory, the legality of it in that sense, and also the fact that all these competing forces of left versus right and globalism versus nationalism, don't you think that, as you would probably conclude, that history is not deterministic? It could easily have been a different situation, and therefore what we have now as a reality needs to be looked upon and viewed in a broad way, not just simply in in ways in which the politicians with sound bites seem to try to get their point across and disregard everybody else's.
Well, speaking for this politician, of course I do sound bites, but I do longer bites too. I use every platform I have. I gave a long speech last night, for example, on the issue of China on its 70th anniversary in central London, about which more later. I write articles, I do sound bites, I conduct interviews with important voices and heads, brains on these subjects, and all the way from Uruguay, we're now listening to your wisdom, and I'm glad to say that you see that you called in. As to the advisory nature, that doesn't hold any water, Jonathan, because the Prime Minister made absolutely clear, as did all of the party leaders, that the decision of the referendum would be final. They did that because they thought they were going to win. And they wanted to make clear that it wouldn't be tolerated, people still going on and on about the European Union and why we should leave it. They made it very clear that the referendum would be final. The pamphlet at £9 million of taxpayers' expense that went to every household in Britain explicitly stated in writing that the decision of the people would be final. But even if that doesn't move you, the triggering of Article 50 to begin the countdown to leaving the European Union was passed overwhelmingly in Parliament, with a majority of hundreds. And in 2017, both Labour and the Conservatives ran on manifestos which stated explicitly that they accepted the result of the referendum and would implement it. So the advisory thing, to me, just doesn't hold any water. Adam, you got a comment on that?
Well, one can't reverse the decision of the electorate until the initial decision is applied according to law. I mean, if I really wanted to have my take at adopting this Ramona visage and psychiatry, the psychiatric state, frankly, why not go to the so-called Supreme Court, Tony Blair's disgraceful pet project, and say, I want a rerun of the 1997 general election, and I have a feeling if it were to be rerun today, the late, great James Goldsmith would become Prime Minister rather than the still with us and very morally decrepit Tony Blair. But one can see the problem. James Goldsmith, who should have been the Prime Minister in 1997, has been dead for quite some time. This isn't how democracy works. One has got to implement something, and then in the next election cycle, one can rectify that depending on one's point of view.
Jonathan, last word to you.
Yes, well, your points are very valid, and no disagreement there. The only thing to add would be simply that politicians are the ones, therefore, that made the mistakes, and they could have done it in a different way. They could have had, for example, a supermajority, as most referendums in other countries may do, particularly on a serious situation like that. So, therefore, if they make mistakes, and they obviously have, in many cases, what's to say that they can't make mistakes again in the future? So this is the nature of democracy.
Well, quite so. I'd also like, if I may say so, correct the dichotomy you painted between globalization and nationalism. There is a third way, at the risk of sounding like Mr. Blair. I'm neither a globalist nor a nationalist. I have an entirely different political philosophy. But for now, the main enemy is globalization, because globalization implies increasingly the negation of democracy. And without democracy, I can never proselytize and hope to persuade my fellow citizens for the third way that I stand for, which is neither globalization nor nationalism. Last word, Jonathan.
Right. Well, again, very valid point. But then I would just simply add that with globalization, you need global politics. If you can make that equation, where in nationalism you have national politics, which vary, of course, from nation to nation. And global politics is a very, very broad term, but it's necessarily relevant.
But you can't have global elections, Jonathan. We're having difficulty enough with our own national elections. The US too, and many other countries. I mean, there is no conceivable way, perhaps 500 years hence, maybe, in which the world can be governed democratically and globally.
Correct. I mean, the immediate point that would be relevant would be the issue of global warming or climate change, simply because it does require all nations, without necessarily elections, but some sort of consensus and the force of those nations to try and do something that would affect everybody worldwide. So yeah. I'm sure you...
Well, of course, that's an interesting point, a different one, a bigger one, and we have dealt with it. We'll deal with it again. But for me, at this point in human history, the nation-state provides the optimal opportunity for democratic control of that state. Because people believe that they belong to a nation which inhabits a space and which elects people to run it and whom they can remove if they don't run it well. And whilst I'm open to the idea that a long time hence, from now in the future, long after we're all gone, there may well be the possibility of extra-national, supranational democratic forms. But for now, I believe the best way of running things is to run them on the basis of nation states, who will then, of course, agree to cooperate with other nation states on matters of mutual interest. It's been fascinating talking to you out there in Uruguay. Thanks for the call. Here's Carlos in Los Angeles. Go ahead, Carlos.
Hi, George. How are you? Hi, Adam. Great to talk to you guys again.
Welcome. Go ahead.
I have a question, maybe a subject you guys might want to shine light upon. It's about the conversation that Trump and President Zelensky from Ukraine had. And I guess it hasn't been observed quite clear in the media in general. And it's about this server that I quote from Trump. He says, they say CrowdStrike. I guess you have one of your wealthy people, the server. They say Ukraine has it. Reports say that that's the server that apparently got hacked from the DNC and was shipped to Ukraine to this company called CrowdStrike. And, they did the forensics on it, and then they decided that it was Russia who hacked it. And it seems to me that that's the root of the whole Russiagate.
Well, it is, Carlos. Let me ask Adam for his view on this whole Ukraine-gate affair. But just to, if I may correct you, the Democratic National Committee's server was never forensically examined. The FBI never saw or touched them. They took the word of a private contractor that the server had been hacked. Now, Adam, if it turns out that the server that should have been examined by the FBI is in Ukraine, well, my first question would be, why the hell is it in Ukraine?
How did it get there?
How did it get there? And if that's the case, Trump has every right, doesn't he, to demand that this be investigated, because this matter has paralyzed most of his administration for most of his first term.
Well, indeed, let's get down to the whole meat of this Ukraine-gate issue. First of all, one can't help but laugh at the fact that first he was accused of collaborating with Russia for 3 years, collaborating with Russia. That went down like a lead balloon over a shark tank. And now he's accused of collaborating not with Mozambique, not with Angola, not with Switzerland, but by Russia's principal enemy
in the world.
It's so the absurdity of someone collaborating with both Russia and Ukraine over an issue that serves neither.
It's like supporting Celtic and Rangers.
Quite so.
If that's obscure to you, I mean good and evil at the same time.
Yes, and now and so that's the silly issue, which happens to be true, and now here's the serious issue, which happens to be astonishing. If these Democrats, these lowly Democrats in my view, are to be believed, diplomacy as we know it is under threat of abolition. What do people realistically expect that heads of state and heads of government talk to each other about? It's not the weather, it's not about the wife, it's not about the cat's feeling a bit ill, it's about crucial matters of mutual self-interest. And for example, if I were the Australian Prime Minister, I would have very, very serious conversations with both the American President and the British Prime Minister about my citizen Julian Assange. It's very typical, for example, when a country wants to extradite someone or wants information, for a request to be made in a semi-formal conversation between heads of state before the state apparati of both countries go into overdrive, collecting evidence and doing the other things they want to do. So the idea that it's somehow untoward for the president of one country to talk to the president of another about potential malfeasance of his own citizen in the country of the other, that's called diplomacy. That's called business as usual. And frankly, what they're doing by trying to claim that this isn't normal, it's to essentially say that no countries can ever conduct private conversations, and there's some irony in this. The same right to privacy and to go about our business that George Bush and Barack Obama in the United States and their lackeys in Europe abolished after 9/11, now we're seeing that presidents themselves aren't having the right to conduct their own private affairs and their own professional affairs with some expectation of privacy. It's very dangerous, but ultimately I think it's going to be a political gamble that's going to backfire for the reasons you said earlier, and also because this looks so petty. It's as though the entire and only position that the Democratic Party has is to destroy Trump by whatever means necessary, I don't think people will fall for it.
Do you think the Congress will, first of all, vote to impeach? And if they do, will it be dead on arrival at the Senate? Or is there a ramp inside the Republican caucus in the Senate that might vote for it and Trump would be history?
I don't think so. I think the most likely scenario now is that it will squeak by through the House, even though even there it could fail on some technicality, but it will probably squeak through the Democratic-controlled House and then be dead on arrival in the Senate, just as it was with Bill Clinton in the late 1990s. And the other issues that were Clinton's scandal and Nixon's scandal were in their second terms. This is in the first term. They're already in election mode. Can they really be in election mode and be in impeachment mode simultaneously? I don't know if they can. People's attention spans are limited. So what do the Democrats want to do? Do they want to win an election, or do they want to impeach Trump just months before the next election? I mean, it's just about October. The election's going to be in November of next year. It really is a question of what penny drops first. It's poorly thought out, poor strategy, poor timing, and I think it's going to be a potential electorally suicidal.
I mean, as I pointed out earlier, if Joe Biden is the candidate, the election becomes about how his crack cocaine-using, dishonorably discharged son got a top job in a gas company in Ukraine, and why Vice President Joe Biden went 13 times to visit him there.
I wonder what could be
going on. If I was writing
wrong.
A campaign script or narrative on that, I could really make hay with that.
I mean, if Biden, as you were saying for quite a few weeks now, Biden at this point should pull out of the race, because if it comes down to, as Trump calls him, sleepy Joe Biden versus energetic and angry Trump, and the more angry he gets, the more energetic he gets, like the Incredible Hulk, golfing down, 50 hamburgers of the McDonald's variety within 5 minutes. And the other candidate doesn't even have his own teeth with which to chew the McDonald's burgers. I mean, this is, and the thing that a lot of people, it's one thing to underestimate Trump, it's another thing to misunderestimate Trump, as the ever so elegant and eloquent George Bush would say. But the thing with Trump is nothing scares him. He loves a good fight. And so these Democrats, I think, it's a bit like an angry mouse going up to a very immodest lion. The lion's going to win.
Carlos, thank you for that call. Now, Leila Victoria is a fan. I thoroughly enjoy hearing Adam's perspective. Although I may not agree with some of his views, I can appreciate that he is a gentleman who can discuss his views objectively without getting angry. I think she means unlike me.
Maybe unlike Donald Trump.
Thank you, Leila. James Ball says, do you think a new political party that is made up of and represents the working class will emerge from the ashes of the present democratic deficit stroke crisis and the Labour Party in the short to medium term? I think we'll leave that for another week, because we need
That's
to
not
see,
going away.
We need to see if the caravanning Prime Minister or leader of the junta, Margaret Beckett, is in office by then. G.J. Woods says, a question for Adam. I have heard through the grapevine that you are limbering up to play the drums on stage during the MOATS on Tour gig in Liverpool. Is there any truth in this? You are, of course, an accomplished drummer.
Perhaps was is a better term to use than are, but, like falling off a bicycle, it never gets old, and unless you're Emily Thornberry. God, that was embarrassing. Well, the best way to find out is to purchase the tickets.
Saturday, the 19th of October in Liverpool at the Liner Hotel. That's only 3 weeks. It's less than 3 weeks.
The year's really flown by.
Yeah. So you can get your tickets at the Ticket Quarter website, which is ticketquarter.co.uk. So that's Saturday, the 19th of October in Liverpool. We're not going to be doing many more of these road shows. We've got this one in Liverpool. We've got another one in East Kilbride. And then I expect to be rather busy in the West Midlands. So there won't be that many more of these. You better get to these two. That's Saturday, 19th October in Liverpool at the Liner Hotel. What he is alluding to, G.J. Woods, is that we've got some fantastic musical talent on stage. So. Not only have we got Brian Travers of UB40, we've got the Jade Assembly playing a set at the MOATS Roadshow. They are a brilliant band. If you haven't heard them, look them up. And now that I know there's a possibility of Adam playing the drums, I'll be twisting his arm.
It depends how much, if I have enough money to bribe the stage crew.
Liam Ryan, a very clever man in Ireland, says, why do Americans make such a big deal of what is essentially rounders, otherwise known as baseball? I've often wondered about, they have a World Series when they're the only country that plays it.
And there's a few from Canada, to be fair, which, if anything, is an insult to the Canadians. But at least there's no makeup involved. The Canadians have had a bit of a struggle on their own hands with that.
Yes, yes, not just blackface, but black body. Did you see that?
Oh, I did see that.
He blacked himself up all over. I don't want to get too deeply into that, but
I've never seen such commitment in my life. Certainly not from a Liberal politician. My word.
Another very clever young woman in Ireland is Filza, who says, she wants to ask you, what's the future of Saudi Arabia and the Houthis' war, especially after today's massive security developments?
Well, it seems as though for the last several years of this war, it's exposed that whilst a lot of romantics on the pro-Iranian side like to describe the Houthis as this kind of Robin Hood, this kind of David versus the Goliath. There's some truth to that, but much exaggerated. But the real story, and frankly the real scandal, and a very expensive one, possibly the most expensive scandal in the world, is just how bad the Saudis are at defending their own territory against these retaliations from the Ansar Allah, the Houthis, in the north of Yemen, the former northern Yemen. And with all the money they spend, the most expensive American...
They've been taken for a ride by the Americans and the British arms manufacturers.
Quite obvious, quite self-evidently. There is
it's just
another
a protection racket. You give us lots of money, we'll give you lots of weapons. You probably can't use them. They're not going to be of much use to you, but it's a way of circulating the petrodollars.
I remember once speaking to a very clever Lebanese man, of course there are many, and he once joked that the Saudi generals and their officers can't even hold a rifle in a straight line in order to fire it, let alone operate these complex, ultra-modern American weapon systems. And that's the thing, most of the weapons that these Houthis have are either amateurish drones or otherwise they're missiles that were generally built by the North Koreans in the 80s, modified by the Iranians in the 90s. I mean, I've seen more sophisticated technology at a car boot sale in Slough. It's not as though these Houthis are some sort of force to be reckoned with, but the Saudis are just hopeless. That's the real scandal, the real story.
Here's Dominic on line one. He's in Pennsylvania on Snowdon. Go ahead, Dominic.
Yeah, George, I saw Snowden on the Young Turk show the other day, and he didn't mention Julian Assange once. You know, he seemed to be more like he's using his platform to sell his book rather than to wake people up to the persecution of real journalists. In fact, he was actually defending the gossip blower on this Ukraine scandal and comparing him to a whistleblower, which to me demeans the term whistleblower itself. People like Assange are imperative to making any changes to the current globalist attack. And if Snowden was sincere, he'd have used some of that time to make that point.
Well, I've just bought Snowden's book. I haven't begun reading it yet. I don't know much about him as an individual. I don't know anything at all about his politics. And, you know, just because you've been a whistleblower doesn't make you necessarily a nice person. It doesn't mean that you're going to have an affinity with, a fellow feeling with other people who've blown a whistle on entirely different things at different times. So, you know, I don't think it invalidates Snowden that he might not be gung-ho for Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange. Each case has to stand on its merits, don't you think, Adam?
Oh, absolutely right. And I've noticed that there's something going on in the house of Snowden, and no one knows quite what. First of all, he said that he wants to seek asylum in France rather than Russia because maybe he's tired of the vodka and he wants some of that common agricultural policy subsidized wine and cheese. Then he said he'd be willing to stand trial in the US so long as he thought it would be a fair trial, and I'm sure that Colin Powell and the others are all too willing to give him one. Maybe Nikki Haley's even going to show him some photographs to try to convince him of that. And he's got the book deal, so it seems as though he's trying to go Hollywood from the middle of God knows where in Russia. And so the Snowden of today is necessarily different than the Snowden of yesteryear because something's up. But that said, nothing could invalidate the very important whistle that he blew, because I believe in free speech, I believe in the right to a private life, I believe in the right to a private online life, and I believe in small government. So for someone like me, I think Snowden did a very good thing.
Dominic, last word to you.
Well, you know, he did a good thing, but my point is, like, that kind of ruined his legacy by not following up. He's not. He has a platform now. He was on CNN. He's on all these shows, and all he's talking about is his book and how he's defending this whistleblower, this gossip person, and it's kind of undermining the cause.
Well,
I think you answered your own question. Now you know he's on CNN.
Yeah, if he's on CNN,
it's for a reason.
Something must be going on. Well, I'm sure he's watching or listening to the show wherever he is in Russia. And if I knew where that was, I couldn't tell you anyway, or I'd have to kill you. Dominic, thanks for that. Mark is in West Virginia. Go ahead, Mark.
Hey, how you doing today, brother?
Wonderful.
Doing well.
Enjoying the show. Hope you are.
Yeah, I got a question. Now, ain't there a thing on fundamental principles on the thing you can look up? Do you know anything about that on the Democrat side? Because ain't they supposed to show two things, fairness, and ain't they supposed to show liberty to the people?
That's not the Democratic Party I know.
It would be an ideal, but it's not, you know.
Fairness and liberty has never been their emblem in my lifetime anyway.
Okay, so, all right. All right. Well, anyway, the Democrats, here's about three things. Anyway, the Democrats wanted to block the wall at first. And then they wanted to do the Mueller report, which there was nothing there, and they still wanted to run on it, and there was nothing in there. That's the second thing. And the third thing is that they come out and try to impeach on nothing. There is nothing there. So,
well, I think Adam's point of view, with which I concur, is that this is the equivalent of struggling to lift a huge rock only to drop it on your own feet. I cannot imagine how this can play well for the Democrats.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree, because I wrote down some things that they've done over the years, and I'll run through it real quick. And it's anyway, they tried to block the wall. They tried the Mueller report too. They done the Joe Biden thing, okay, which they should have looked into him, but they don't want nothing to do with him.
Okay, look, Mark, the hour is late and many people trying to get through, and I'm grateful for your call. Let's go to Rashid in Virginia. Are you in Langley, Rashid?
Formerly, only formally.
Okay.
No wonder the line's so crystal clear.
The line is very clear. This must be approved, this call. Go ahead.
The question to both of you is this, is that we see what's going on with Mr. Trump right now and the allegations of his wrongdoing with Ukraine. And Adam mentioned that, the Democrats are almost hapless in trying to pursue this. But my argument would be, is it the Democrats, or are they taking their marching orders from the deep state? And then the question to both of you is this deep state an international affair? And then the deeper conspiratorial question is, are there connections to private central banks? And your opinions on that?
Well, I don't know about the last point. Adam will know better than me. That the deep state is an international thing is undoubtedly true. And in the Russiagate, we saw it in action. it turned out that Russia was not interfering in America's elections, but Britain was, and the British Secret Service was. Of course, it's an ex-MI6 officer, but my experience in life is there's no such thing as an ex-MI6 officer. Once you are a part of British intelligence, unless you leave under a cloud or because you're making a break from them, like Annie Mashon, for example, from MI5, then you will always be a part of that milieu, and the dossier, the dirty dossier, the girls wetting themselves in a hotel room in Moscow, so excited were they to be in the presence of Donald J. Trump, and all of that, that was all British product. Orbis is a British company, and the people, I'm not allowed to mention even one of them, it would be committing a crime apparently, if I even mentioned one of their names. But they were all British, they were all British deep state operatives, and they were operating with the US deep state against the President of the United States. That sounds like the script of a thriller novel or film, but that's actually what happened, Adam.
Well, indeed, and as I'm sure the gentleman knows, I'm opposed to these cartels, these private central banks. I'm opposed to any form of central banking. And, of course, Donald Trump and the Federal Reserve aren't very good friends, even though, that being said, his criticisms of the Federal Reserve is that he wants their slightly stupid policy to be amended into a very stupid one. But he has appointed someone to the board of the Federal Reserve who's a woman who's pro-gold standard, pro-sound money. So maybe Trump has some sound tricks up his sleeve. But I don't think there's a direct connection between his row with the Federal Reserve and this, but there might be. There was, just about a month ago, a former chairman of the New York Federal Reserve Bank who wrote in Bloomberg, in the open, with pride, about how the Federal Reserve can use its powers of manipulation to influence political cycles and influence elections. Maybe we're seeing this happen under our eyes. We don't know, but the point of it is that Trump has angered just about every rich and powerful person who doesn't live in Trump Tower. And that's saying quite a lot. He does have a big battle on his hands. I think he'll win it.
Rashid, last word to you.
Let's take it full circle. Mr. Trump has not been the ideal candidate for people who are anti-war, yet he has not instigated a war with Iran yet. The deep state is totally disappointed with that. They don't want him for a second term because they want that war with Iran. And that's the only way they can keep this phony economy alive for another 4 to 10 years.
Rashid, thanks. Stay clear of Langley if you want my advice. Istvan is in Hungary. Haven't had a call from Hungary. Better take it. Yes, go ahead, sir.
Good evening, Mr. Galloway. Good evening.
Good evening.
I liked your show very long, but in the last weeks and months, I didn't like it so much. I had problems with it.
Okay.
For example, your professor now, he says we shouldn't indict Mr. Trump, who is a criminal, and we have to wait for some days and plays with that. But we're doing indict him because we want democracy. Somebody who broke the law, who should go away. We should put him away.
Istvan, I think that every single president of the United States of America has been a criminal. And if you were to impeach and then prosecute every president of the United States, Mount Rushmore would have no faces on it. They were either slave owners, massacrers of the indigenous American population, or a part of an annual war for 230 years or more against one part of the world or another. The United States presidents have interfered in other people's elections throughout the world for centuries. So it's not that I'm saying, certainly Adam can speak for himself, it's not that I'm saying that Donald Trump isn't a crook. Heaven knows there's no end to the allegations against him. The point is, are the people out to get him bigger crooks than him? And if you want my take on it, they are. I believe that Hillary Clinton is a bigger crook than Donald Trump. And Hillary Clinton already has, and certainly would have, taken us into war after war after war, and Donald Trump hasn't. That's the difference, in my mind, between the two of them. Adam.
Those are all important differences. And the other important thing we have to remember is Donald Trump isn't the Prime Minister of Hungary, and therefore one can't hold him or judge him by the standards of another country. One needs to look at what Trump is within the American context. In the same way, I think Duterte is a great president of the Philippines, probably wouldn't make a great Prime Minister of Italy. I think Xi Jinping is a great president of China, wouldn't necessarily make a great president of Finland, and the list can go on. Donald Trump is a uniquely, far from being Russian or Ukrainian, a uniquely American phenomenon, and within the context of American politics, he's absolutely the best that there could be who could get in. Now, the best president America never had is, in my view, Ron Paul, but Dr. Paul had the legs cut out from underneath him so very early on, where Trump, because of his wealth, because of his fearlessness, because of his ability to punch back at the people who have a go constantly because they mistakenly think they're hard enough, he's doing something very interesting. He's taking this horrible establishment and he's trashing it constantly. I think within the context of American politics, that's something to be celebrated.
Istvan, last word to you.
I didn't like the answer. I would say we have to do something against somebody. And to you, Mr. Garrie, you attacked Europe again the last months because of this Brexit. And, this is interesting for me because England made the rules, the legislation, the bills together with Europe. And now says, okay, it's Europe's fault. And we have nothing to do with it. We don't want to do anything.
I'm not saying that. I opposed the Maastricht Treaty, which made the European Union. I opposed it with all of my strength, as did the Labour Party, as did many honourable Conservatives, who the Prime Minister of the time, John Major, called a very insulting swear word. But we were never given, as we ought to have been, given a referendum on whether we wanted to move from a common market to a European Union through the Maastricht Treaty. Then we got a referendum. We got a chance in 2016. Be happy for us, Istvan. I'll tell you what, from what I know of Hungarian politics, if they gave you a similar referendum, you might get the same result. Is it possible we've already left the European Union, that May's extension was not lawful?
Right, so several things there. What the gentleman's referring to is this legal case brought by the leader of a small party called English Democrats called Robin Tilbrook. And his barristers, as the appellate process continues, will be putting forward the idea that because there was never a repeal of the legislation which said that Britain would leave the European Union at the end of March this year, that Britain already as a matter of law has, and that May's extensions of the Article 50 deadline as agreed between her and Brussels were therefore unlawful. Let's break down the possible scenarios here. Now, before God or the devil or Tiny Tim invented something called Gina Miller, the following was true. Royal prerogative gave the Queen and Parliament, which in reality means the Prime Minister, it gave him or her the ability to make treaties, to engage in foreign relations, and to have outcomes spring up because of that process. And there was a good reason for it, because, one, foreign affairs are a very static thing, and it's probably best handled by one person and a small group of advisors rather than a Parliament of over 600. The other reason is that one doesn't doesn't get to choose the kind of government of the people that you're dealing with. Let's say there's a democracy that hamstrings the head of government through parliamentary procedure, and they're dealing with a dictatorship that can make foreign policy at the flick of a wrist, quite literally, in some cases. Now, with the European Union, whose parliament is totally irrelevant, Britain would be at a disadvantage if in every negotiation between the British head of government, who represents the head of state, and the European oligarchy, this commission, it would be very unfair because the commission can do whatever it wants. And if a prime minister was beholden to parliament on every issue of negotiation, it could get quite hairy. This is the way that the constitution of this country has worked for centuries. Along comes Gina Miller, and her lawyers successfully went through the court system, and the justices of the highest court, this so-called Supreme Court, said that Parliament would have to agree to send the European Union a notice to be only delivered by the head of government saying that we're leaving this European Union. And that happened with a Parliament whose composition was very similar to this. Now, enter Mr. Tilbrook's case, who in some ways is using the logic of the Miller case, but towards a different political lens, one that I happen to support. I support Brexit 100%. Now, according to what Tilbrook is saying, because Parliament didn't overturn the previous legislation, which said Britain's leaving the EU on the 29th of March, it means that May acted unlawfully in asking for the extensions in the same way she would have done, according to the Miller case, if she just rang up Jean-Claude Juncker and said, pass the wine, we've declared Article 50 henceforth triggered without consulting Parliament. In this very politicized judicial environment, I think that even though Mr. Tilbrook's case is in some ways even more watertight than Miller's, I don't think it will go through, one, because of this politicization, and two, because one of the differences, one of the minutial differences that the barristers will probably pick apart is that while Miller's initial case with triggering Article 50 dealt with something that was absolute and unambiguous, the triggering of the article necessary to leave the EU, what Mr. Tilbrook is trying to do is modify her subsequent management of that initial phenomenon, which even those who are sort of born-again roundheads would probably say is the charge of royal prerogative.
But what if the government itself adopted Mr. Tilbrook's case?
Then it would be a slightly different issue.
And what if the government merely acted as if the earlier Theresa May extension was null and void? It would cause a lot of legal hurly-burly, but by then we'd already be into a general election. In which case, hurly-burly is the name of the game.
And this is where it gets even more interesting. There's the second case that Gina Miller brought, along with the P-man, John Major himself, saying that the act of royal prerogative used to prorogue Parliament was an overuse of royal prerogative. I think an even more absurd assertion, a far more absurd assertion than Miller's first case. The courts, again, put down a judgment in favour of a strong interpretation of parliamentary sovereignty and a weak interpretation of royal prerogative. But this time, as you quite rightly say, that same argument might work well for Boris Johnson.
In Europe, I mean, according to European law, Boris Johnson may have the right to simply go to the European Council in October and raise a glass and say, we're out of here.
Indeed. And so you've got the European law, which tragically reigns supreme over English and Welsh law, and then you have the contradictory pieces of legislation. Because we have to remember this...
the key word, contradictory.
Indeed, because
and the Prime Minister can say, look, these 2, 3, 4, 10 things all contradict each other.
And neither one has formally repealed. If the Benn Act explicitly repealed this, but it didn't.
No,
it didn't at all.
They didn't have the guts
So
to
we're
do
living in judicially very interesting
times. Very interesting times. The rule here on the show is when there's a legend on the line, that legend must take priority. We have a written constitution. That legend must take legend must take priority according to our constitution over everything else. And the legend is on the line. It's Norma in Bristol. Norma, we missed you. Go ahead.
Hello, George.
Hi.
Well, you said to Matthew Goodwin earlier,
Yeah.
thank you for helping us.
Yeah.
Now, it's made me more confused because I would like to vote to leave the EU again if there's another referendum, but I couldn't vote Tory at a general election. If I voted Labour at a general election, that would probably mean I wanted to stay in the EU. So it's very confusing. What I really would like is to get this Brexit over soon, and then we can vote Labour. I could vote Labour at the general election for all the things that we need to sort.
Well, that's why I said, you've heard me say it, Norma,
Yeah.
that it was far, far better for Labour if Boris Johnson had got Brexit over and then the general election could be fought on normal things, on all the other things.
Yes, yes.
That's why I have never understood why Labour put in so much effort to stop Boris Johnson from leaving the European Union, because that page could have been turned by now. Now, Adam's not a Labour voter. Let's hear his point of view on it.
I think from the point of view of objective tactics, you're absolutely right. They've played this one so poorly, and now you're getting to the stage where, even though I don't think Labour would win the next election with the majority in any case, Corbyn may well be thrown overboard even before the next election in the name of national unity and other such utter humbug, which is a word I've been using before I've even heard Mr. Johnson use it, but well done, Boris. Bad haircuts have brains that think alike underneath them. But I think I wouldn't dare to give advice to a legend, but there is such a thing called the Brexit Party, who are actively campaigning for people that normally vote Labour, but can't stomach the fact that Labour has become a Remain party, irrespective of the gobbledygook that came out of Brighton the other week. So that's a possibility.
It partly depends where you are,
yes.
Norma, and who your MP is. I mean, if I lived in Barking, you wouldn't seriously expect me to vote for Dame Margaret Hodge, who, although she's been triggered and may be deselected, I suspect she will not be. I suspect that John McDonnell will be appealing to the Labour members in Barking not to deselect Dame Margaret Hodge. I could say the same in Southwark with Coyle, Brighton with Kyle. I could go around the country and pick out the most thoroughly reactionary, objectively noxious individuals who will be carrying Labour tickets.
It's elementary, Watson.
Election.
So to speak.
Yes, I couldn't possibly comment. Norma, isn't it true that if we get Margaret Beckett as our Prime Minister for a year and they go for a referendum before a general election, that's effectively a coup against not just the people and the country, it's a coup against Jeremy Corbyn too.
I know. It's such a medal, George. No. It really is.
I mean, that would be curtains for Jeremy Corbyn. He wouldn't even have got time to put up curtains in 10 Downing Street. Margaret Beckett would have driven our caravan up Downing Street and that would have been it. I mean, how Labour has got into a situation where one of its own members is openly intriguing to bypass the leader of the Labour Party and install someone else completely in Downing Street, and not for days, weeks, but for months, maybe a whole year. Well, Norma, you're the last call. I'm grateful to you for it. I understand the confusion that exists about the current situation. I understand we had some confusion at the beginning with our various feeds. Please bear with us. Next week will be perfect, I promise you. But we did go out tonight on SputnikNews.com across the world, on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C., on AM right across the United States of America, and on RT International YouTube, RT International Facebook, RT UK YouTube, RT UK Facebook, RT UK Twitter, George Galloway Facebook, George Galloway YouTube, George Galloway Twitter. How's that for progress, Adam?
It's quite impressive. It's a bit like living in North Korea meets modern America. Hundreds of channels, but the same thing on every one. I quite like it.
What a very brilliant observation. Now, I said earlier that I spoke on China earlier.
Yes.
I was disappointed you weren't at the meeting. It was very well attended. It's been viewed by thousands of people, the speeches that have been made. Now, Chinese TV has got a new channel, CGTN, in English, and they haven't been going for more than, well, I think a few weeks. And they've already got Ofcom on their case. Ofcom is investigating now, having already interfered with so many other channels, is now interfering with the Chinese, which just goes to show, Adam, that we are in a much better place now with the mother of all talk shows, because we are beyond the reach of Ofcom, which cares nothing about media pluralism, which cares nothing about freedom of expression and liberty. Its sole purpose is to try and police a tyrannical prevailing orthodoxy. Well, not for us, not for me, not for Adam, not for you, I hope. It's been marvellous for me. I hope it is also for you. And if it is, that you'll come back next week at the same time and in all these new places and bring another viewer and listener with you. Because if you do, we'll reach 1 million viewers and listeners by Christmas. Good night.